That's what the trade-off is. That said, that's really great for Jason in this matchup because ramping to end hostilities is pretty powerful against heroic strategies. He also is playing a main deck Ugin this weekend, and Ugin is spectacular against, I mean, it's 8 mana, tough to get into play, but once it's there against a heroic strategy, forget about it.
Now take a look at Joe's creatures here very quickly. It does have 4 copies of Favorite Hoplite, 4 Hero of Iroas, 4 Battle-Wise Hoplite. Those are always going to be there. Then he has 1 Seeker of the Way and then 2 copies of Monastery Mentor. So giving that card a try this weekend. 4 God's Willings, of course, in the heroic strategy. 4 Defiant Strike, 4 Ordeal of Thassa. Then he has 4 copies of Team or Battle Range, 3 Ordeal of Heliod. That numbers in that card have really increased. 2 Valorous Stance, a Feat of Resistance, and a Treasure Cruise.
Yeah, Ordeal of Heliod went from 1 as a target for your Heliod's Pilgrim to maybe you have a second one in your main deck too. We now regularly see 3 or 4 copies.
You talk about Heliod's Pilgrim. Not in the main deck, not in the sideboard either. A card that has worked its way out of these heroic decks as they've become more streamlined.
It has become a lot more streamlined, which makes the tutoring aspect of it a little bit less potent. And also the deck is just doesn't have enough mana and time to mess around with that sort of effect. So when I played White Blue Heroic at an FNM, I was loaned the deck when I had a weekend off. I played with it. Heliod's Pilgrim definitely was disappointing in that deck. Just too slow. Tapping out is not something this deck wants to do. It wants to leave up God's Willing all the time. And no surprise, as the deck has become a little bit more streamlined, people are playing more 3 and 4 ofs as their enchantments. That Heliod's Pilgrim has fallen to the wayside as a result.
Yeah, the initial time that we saw White Blue Heroic in Columbus in the hands of course, Tom Ross, he had the Heliod's Pilgrims and kind of a little tutor engine with a main deck copy of Aqueous Form and some other things to be able to find Stratus Walk as well. It is always kind of interesting to look at the deck lists of Heroic and how they do change over the course of the weeks that we watch these great players play it. Again, Aqueous Form, gone. Stratus Walk, gone. I remember Logan Mize and Stephen Mann having versions of the deck with a lot of copies of those cards.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot of really good enchantments to pull from, and it's interesting to see the evolution of this deck.
Well, round number 4 underway here. Joe on 5 cards misses his second land drop. Jason was down to 6. You saw him start with 2 copies of Sandstorm Citadel. Now here is a Temple of Malady. Very quickly leaves the top card on top. Joe, all he can do is pass the turn back, probably hoping that Jason plays a creature so he can cycle Defiant Strike.
Pretty rough to do the old mulligan to 5 and now be at risk of discarding to hand size. Not a good start.
Well, here's something for him to cycle Defiant Strike on.
Perfect.
Lucky Joe.
Jason messing up here by casting a Siege Rhino. Et cetera.
No Defiant Strike for Joe to cycle. Joe's going to pick up his 1 planes, and just like that, we are headed to game number 2. Siege Rhino doesn't take long, does it?
I think there's a case that even if Joe does have Defiant Strike, that he's not casting it because he wants to conceal his deck. He could easily be playing some sort of other white aggressive strategy, even blue-white control, which he's known for playing in Legacy. No reason to reveal any information when that game is hopeless. Even if Joe cycles into a second land, he's done for.
No, I think it's see Joe taking a nice little look at the camera there. I think it's probably wise just to concede. Now, of course, if Jason's someone who does watch the Open Series quite a bit or follows Joe's stream, he knows that he plays White Blue Heroic. But if he doesn't, Joe's able to conceal that information, and we'll see how players do sideboard. And we start by taking a look at Joe's sideboard now that he knows what he's up against.
2 Laguna Bottom Trailblazer, an Ordeal of Heliod, 3 copies of Glare of Heresy, 2 Erases, a Treasure Cruise. He's got 1 in the main deck and then 1 in the sideboard, 3 copies of Disdainful Stroke, 3 copies of Stubborn Denial. So the most attractive cards in Joe's sideboard are the 6 counter spells here. The Stubborn Denials can keep Jason off of his big plays like Planeswalkers and Hostilities. And then Disdainful Stroke is all sorts of good against nearly every threat that Jason brings to the table. Once you get past that, you have some other options that are good, but not great. The second copy of Treasure Cruise, some number of the Glare of Heresies as an answer to Planeswalkers or Siege Rhino, but I don't think Joe wants too much of that kind of stuff. And possibly the Trailblazers as well to give Joe a target that can't be Bio-Blighted and just more creatures to weather the storm of Jason, probably bringing in more removal post-board.
We'll take a look at Herren's sideboard now. 3 Glare of Heresy, 3 Bio-Blight, 3 Drown in Sorrow, 2 Wreath of Bones, 2 Nissa Worldwaker, a Murderous Cut, and an additional copy of Tassiger, the Golden Fang. He's got 1 in his main and 1 in his side this weekend. Just more removal, really.
More removal and a wide array of removal, which is very nice against a deck like White Blue Heroic. The Glare of Heresies are very nice at catching things that get out of control. The Bio-Blights and Drown Sorrows can play pretty well against creatures before they get enchanted. The additional copy of Murderous Cut going to be good in this matchup. I think that Tassiger is also a nice weapon for Jason in this matchup. I can see the game getting to a spot where he's able to get Tassiger into play, start using the activated power, finding more removal, and winning the game that way. It's a little awkward in conjunction with Sylvan Caryatid because you have at least 1 bad card to flip over. So I don't know if he necessarily wants the second copy, but I think Tassiger could play a role in this matchup.
Well, game number 2 going to be underway, as game number 1 was a very, very short one between Lossett and Herren. And while these players do shuffle up and get ready, we will talk about Patrick Chapin's favorite book.
Pro Tour champion, Magic Hall of Famer, resume speaks for itself. One of the all-time greats, and in my opinion, Magic's greatest writer. Available with the newest edition of Next Level Magic for 2015, updated with new examples, new text. It's been out of print and paper book for a year now, so it's available now in paper book, ebook as well. StarCityGames.com/NLM to order your copy today.
Didn't have the Pro Tour he was looking for, Pro Tour Fate Reforged, but you know what I love about Chapin is he's not afraid to play maybe an off-the-wall deck like he did at the Pro Tour with his Tassigers and his Gurmarg Anglers, and you know, I know the result, you know, of him not having a great weekend. It's just like, how could you play that deck? But it's so funny how we look at results as a community, because if he goes 8-2 at that deck, or 7-3, he looks like a genius.
Exactly. People, it's important to keep a wider perspective. Chapin's no dummy. Obviously put in a lot of work on that deck. And you can have bad tournaments with good decks. So it's important, if you're going to make an assessment about what's going on there, to actually build the deck yourself, play it against the gauntlet, get a sense for what's going on, and maybe then you can dismiss it, or maybe you can say, I think this deck's really good, or maybe you can say, I think I need to swap these 2 cards for those 2 cards. But just saying he did bad there and the deck's unexpected, therefore his deck's bad, that's a really flawed way of looking at things.
Favorite hoplite here for Lossett to start things off. Full player's going to keep 7. So we're underway in game number 2 of round 4. There's a Temple of Silence there for Jason. Now, one thing to keep in mind, too, with Heroic, part of the reason that Tom Ross and some other players gravitated towards this strategy is because you have such a good matchup against mid-range green decks.
Well, Jason's likely to start the game on a tap land, and then turn 2, it's going to be a Caryatid or another tap land. It's hard for the Zed to cast Bioblade on turn 2. So you, on the play, you have 2 clean turns of doing whatever you want to. And that's often enough for Heroic to get a sizable threat into play and then have God's Willing or other counterspells to protect it. That opening is very, very potent against mid-range green strategies.
Joe going to come across here for a little bit of damage. Does he have another land is the question. He does in Mystic Monastery. Favorite hoplites a 2-3 as he passes the turn back over to Herren. His draw for the turn was a copy of Sandsep Citadel. He will play a Temple of Malady, though. Take a look at the top card, and we're going to see where it's going to go here in just a moment. Staying on top, pass it back over to Lossett. It's the kind of start that Joe wants to see on the other side of the table. Slow out of the gates.
Yes. No Caryatid, no availability to Bioblight on turn 2. You're really banking on having a couple turns in the clear against these green decks to get your large creature online, and Joe has gotten exactly that.
Joe will take a point of damage. He wants to take the opportunity to get an Ordeal of Thassa into play. He has done just that. Trigger Heroic and then attack. Some counters going to favorite hoplite. 2 cards coming thanks to the Ordeal. So that's 1, that's 2. Temple of Enlightenment among them. Joe will get some damage across as well. This is a Temple of Enlightenment. Take a look at the top card. It's as though Joe is looking at a Flooded Strand. Top card, bottom card. Kick it over. And now still use the draw here for Jason. Potent card in the matchup. There's your Hero's Downfall. That'll get that off the table.
And Jason taking no chances there, not hoping Joe to add more enchantments because of God's Willing and other counterspells, just wants to get it out of play while the coast is clear.
So Joe will have to rebuild here. He'll start with a Temple of Enlightenment. Take a look at the top card. It's going to the bottom now. Now the follow is a Battle-Wise Hoplite. Joe does have Hero of Heroes in hand as well, but he's going to go with the 2-2 that has a better effect when targeted by Heroic, one could argue. With just 1 mana available, and we know how Heroic strategies, be it white, blue, or Jeskai, they love to play this little game with their mana up. But Siege Rhino doesn't care about games. That's going to come into play.
How many matches do you think people have lost against White Blue Heroic by playing around a God's Willing the entire game that was never there? Happens all the time, yeah? But the flip side of it is if you spend 3 or 4 mana on a removal spell and it gets hit with God's Willing, you often lose a game as a result of that sequence. So it's a very challenging deck to play against.
Well, now that Jason has a clock on the table, Joe's going to have to reassess some things. So he's going to take a little look at his hand here. Got a couple of creatures hanging out. Looks like he's got a Valorous Stance, though, to get the Siege Rhino off of the table. Great new addition from Fate Reforged to this deck.
It's so good. in a number of respects. You know, it's another thing to target your creatures with. Also, this deck wants to be able to interact with the board, but doesn't really want to play explicit creature removal because then you just have these draws that don't go anywhere. You need enchantments plus creatures to put them on. So Valorous Stance is a great way of splitting the difference, allowing you to interact without having to play a card that only removes creatures.
Sandstep Citadel will come down. That's land number 5 for Jason. Keep in mind he does have End Hostilities in hand. You can also see a Glare of Heresy. This new age build of Abzan midrange has a very high density of removal spells.
Yes. Backed up by End Hostilities as well. So it's asking a lot out of Joe. Just God's Willings are not enough to protect him in this matchup because his entire board can get swept away at a moment's notice.
Well, Joe's got some thinking to do now. You see the Ordeal of Thassa in his hand. He's going to target Battlewise Hoplite. Heroic trigger means he gets to scry. But will the ordeal resolve? That's the question.
This is a really interesting trap that Joe is trying to set here. He actually wants Jason to respond. So this way he can use God's Willing, and that's going to make sure that the ordeal actually triggers. I think Jason may have been better served, if he wanted to run this line of play, by allowing Joe to move into combat. The ordeal takes him up to 2 counters, and then go for the Utter End.
Sure.
Because as it stands, Joe has set the trap and it's been successful. He's going to be able to draw the 2 cards off of Ordeal immediately, as opposed to being on 1 more turn delay. And that's a big deal because Jason has access to End Hostilities next turn. So allowing Joe to draw 2 cards here is a huge deal.
And can't forget about the damage that's going to be dealt this turn too.
Oh, it's a lot, yeah.
Yep.
But when you're trying to weather the storm, when you're trying to out-card advantage Joe in the long term, allowing him to draw 2 cards off the Ordeal the turn before you're going to end hostilities, that's a huge swing. And it also means that Joe could find potentially a copy of Stubborn Denial, and then your end hostilities isn't even good anymore.
So the Scry from Battlewise Hoplite resolved. Now the Scry from God's Willing resolves. Now the Ordeal trigger from Heroic. That's going to allow Joe to put another card on the bottom. Now Ordeal will resolve. So nice job of clearing the stack here by Joe, making sure he sequences everything correctly. And now he gets to come into the red zone. Trigger. Ordeal will occur. 2 cards coming. You mentioned Stubborn Denial. That's the card he's probably on the hunt for. And a whole bunch of damage is going to come across here. So a great turn there for Joe.
Yeah, and Joe definitely set the trap. That was all on purpose there. He was hoping that Jason would respond with, you know, Utter End or Hero's Downfall with all of his mana, and Joe would be able to deal a bunch of damage that turn and get the Ordeal of Thassa to trigger.
Herren draws a copy of Hero's Downfall, but he's going to play End Hostilities here, and Joe has a Valorous Stance. Boy, oh boy. That card's been great in this matchup.
2 copies in the list, and you've seen both ends now.
Yep.
Killed a Siege Rhino, and now has kept his Battlewise Hoplite around.
Top card going to stay on top, and I think that's a Defiant Strike, and if that's the case, that's going to get the job done on this game.
Yep.
Joe will take a draw. It is a Defiant Strike. That'll trigger a Heroic. That'll give +1. That's a very well-played game by a very good player.
Set the trap. That was definitely calculated totally on purpose, and I think if you're on Jason's side of the table there, you know, you have to put yourself in Joe's shoes. You say go with 4 mana up, and Joe is willing to play an Ordeal of Thassa. Something's got to be going on. Joe's not playing that game thinking, Jason's just flooding out, he's got nothing going on. Joe is aware that you have a removal spell to respond with, and if he's casting the Ordeal of Thassa in that spot, he's trying to set a trap. Joe executed it beautifully, and as a result, wins game number 2.
Game number 3, Herren will be on the play. We'll see if he can get the W here, if Lossett will eke it out on the draw. Keep in mind, we didn't really get a first game. Joe Mulligan to 5 had 1 land. That's really all he got to do. So to be able to bounce back from that, didn't really get to participate in game number 1, but played a very, very, very good game number 2.
Those are games that are, oddly enough, easy to not get flustered about because there was literally nothing to be done about it.
Sure.
So whatever, just move on to the next one. And Joe played very, very well in game number 2.
Well, for this tournament, part of the reason Joe's here is that he wants to qualify for the Players' Championship at the end of 2015. Well, we have seen Joe get there. He was there for 2014. We also saw Dylan Donegan there as well, and how Dylan got there is very memorable. Won that Season 4 Invitational in Seattle. We got Steven Man there as well as a result. That's why Dylan's got this fantastic token, A lot of places you can pick it up.
Yeah, absolutely. It's available to everyone who signs up for the main event of our 20K Open Series, all of our 5K Premier IQ players, and any order from StarCityGames.com in excess of $5 will come with this token.
Look at that young master.
Yep. He's going to be a good one.
Yeah, I think he is. And I know he's heading to college. He's 17, lives in North Carolina. He's going to college, actually in Texas.
North Texas, I believe.
Yeah, he's going to go there, I believe, for drumming.
Are they the Mean Green or the Green or something? I forget what their university's called.
Not entirely sure.
But anyhow,
he'll be in the area. So I think when the Open Series does come to Dallas or Houston, assuming that he has a car or some friends he can go with, we'll get to see more of him. And you guys can see more of him with this token. There are the ways to get it. I'll probably see him at the Season 1 Invitational, I imagine.
I believe so. I mean, and Richmond is not that far away from North Carolina.
Yep. But I agree with you. He's going to, if he plays a bunch, you know, life takes over sometimes and college and all that stuff. But if he gets into the Magic kind of lifestyle and hard luck, I think he's going to be really good.
You can just tell when someone who is young actually understands the game on a pretty deep level. There's some young people who are good because they're just playing a ton and they sort of memorize what's going on in particular games. And then there are some people who just get it at a very early age. And Dylan, I think, is one of those players. Noah Cohen, player that we have regularly in the Open Series, is another example.
Yeah. Plus, winning an invitational when you're 17.
It's a lot. I happened to grow up with someone who was a young master, not to compare Noah or Dylan to this guy, but Eugene Harvey from the age of 15 understood Magic at a level deeper than most people who have played their entire lives.
Sure.
Some people just get it.
Have the natural ability.
Right.
Just kind of understand the card and the games and how everything interacts.
Whereas, like Osip Levodovich, for example, who's also a tremendous Magic player, don't get me wrong, most of his skill or most of his ability and success came from just he played a bunch, he saw what was going on in the games. His 74th and 75th cards he was selecting for constructed decks were excellent choices, you know. Obviously, he's a master, too. You had to have some fundamental understanding of Magic to be that successful, but Eugene got it from, I don't know, the jump point.
You could just tell in the basement when you guys were playing.
Exactly.
Jason Herren, Joe Lossett. Game number 3 going to be underway here from Houston in just a moment. Do want to thank you guys for tuning in. Cedric Phillips, Patrick Sullivan, Nick Miller on the sideboard, and the rest of the SCG Live crew here at SCG Live. Hashtag SCGHOU on Twitter if you'd like to chime in on what's been happening. And of course, you can join the feature match area on Twitch as well. So we make our way through 9 rounds of competition today, 6 tomorrow, some elimination rounds too. We're going to crown a champion here.
And this is a big tournament for Joe, certainly, for Jim Davis. And with the Open Series not coming to Houston very often, I mean, this is the first time, you know, and New Orleans is nearby. We don't go there very frequently. For a lot of players, this is a great opportunity to qualify for the Invitational as well.
Jason has at least one Hero's Downfall in hand. The question is, does he have the necessary lands to operate? You see him bring a Sandsep Citadel forward, also an Hostilities and Glare of Heresy in hand. So his hand does look pretty good.
Well, it's very expensive, and there's only 2 lands. But I think the Scry land and the Hero's Downfalls means you can't really pass this one up.
A Plains and a favorite Hoplite will get things started off here for Joe. Jason will take a draw step. There's a 3rd land, a Sandsep Citadel, but he's off to that slow start. All of his lands entering the battlefield tapped. Mana Confluence to draw here for Joe.
That was huge because he was without land number 2. He kept a 1-lander here on the draw. With God's Willing and 1 drops, I think it's a fine hand to keep, but that was a huge, huge draw step.
There's an attack for 1. And let's see what the follow-up's going to be here for Joe. He's going to take 1 no matter what it is. He has Hero of Iroas and Battle-Wise Hoplite to choose from. Last time he went with Battle-Wise Hoplite. This time he'll go with Hero of Iroas.
And this is the spot, you know, Drown in Sorrow in this matchup is very hot and cold. Sometimes it's awesome and sometimes it doesn't do anything. This is one of the spots where it would be incredible for Jason if he had it. And when Jason put that land number 3 into play tapped, I assure you Joe was breathing a sigh of relief.
Glare of Heresy will take care of the hero. Jason's draw last turn was a Thoughtseize. Keep that in mind as we do move forward here as Joe draws a Plains.
Yeah, Thoughtseize allows him to chain together some pretty potent stuff, particularly in conjunction with the end hostilities in his hand, because it's likely Joe has a hand that has one thing to protect him from end hostilities, Valorous Stance or one of the counter spells. Thoughtseize can break that up and open up a line for Joe to have his entire board ripped apart.
Ordeal of Thassa will target the Hoplite. 2 counters placed onto it, which means an attack for 3. And a passing of the turn. Jason will draw. Murderous Cut is what he's picked up. Problem here for Jason is he does not have land number 4. Now, Abzan midrange is very tough to beat when he can play multiple spells in one turn because the spells are so powerful, but he's not at that flashpoint yet.
Exactly. And now, if Jason has land number 4 here, he can go Thoughtseize into Hero's Downfall. And if Joe only has one God's Willing in hand, Joe's draw gets bad real fast. Without land number 4, now Jason has to either Thoughtseize this turn or Hero's Downfall. Both of these play very nicely into the God's Willing Joe has in hand.
And he's going to cast it. That'll counter the Hero's Downfall. That'll put a counter on Favorite Hotblade. This will also allow Joe to scry, and in a little bit, it'll allow him to draw 2 cards. Now, what's interesting is that he's looking at a copy of Teamer Battle Rage.
Hold up. This might kill Jason.
Well, Joe's doing some math, and he's leaving the Battle Rage on top. Joe gonna draw. I can't forget the Teamer Battle Rage also does trigger Heroic.
Yep, it's an exciting time to be alive. Tell you what.
This is mostly what the splash is in Joe's deck for. Gonna draw a couple cards. If he finds like a card like Defiant Strike here, it's probably just game over.
Yeah, I think it's a kill.
And he's found a Defiant Strike.
So that's 5, 6, 7. And then double strike plus a heroic trigger, I believe, is 16.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh.
There's Defiant Strike. Draw a card. Yep. Joe doing some math. Here's Teamer Battle Rage. Oh, we're not done just yet, my friend.
Nope, you're not off the hook. No, we're actually dealing.
He wants to take a little licksky-poo.
It's not good. Tell you what, it's not good. It's 16. Jason's curve here of Glare of Heresy and the Hero's Downfall is not going to be good enough.
Kindly leave. That will not get the job done. That is going to do it. Joe Lossett is going to win this match here over Jason Herren. 2-1. Did get to play game number 1, but he certainly got to play games 2 and 3. Jeskai Heroic moves on to 4-0.
And give a lot of credit to Mana Confluence that game, rolling off the top on turn 2, then generating blue mana for Ordeal of Thassa, and then red mana for the Battle Rage.
So interesting in Joe's deck, where we have seen White Blue Heroic quite a bit, of course. Players Championship, Joe winning in Columbus with it in week 1 of 2015. Pretty straightforward stuff. You could change the slots there. How many Ordeals, how many Stratus Walks, Aqueous Form? Yes to Heliod's Pilgrim, maybe not. Who knows? But we haven't seen this take on it. We saw Zach Jesse when we were in Washington, D.C. playing Red-White Heroic, but we haven't seen, boom, put it all together.
Right.
First time.
So the costs here are, Mystic Monastery. That's the big cost. You have to play that land. You're not really excited to do it. Although those decks often have to play Tranquil Cove just to have enough blue and